When my grandmother's will was read, I thought it would be the moment my life finally changed for the better. Instead, it shattered me in ways I never expected. My cousins sat in polished leather chairs as the lawyer explained how the $8.5 million estate in New York would be divided. They smiled, nodded, and whispered about what they would buy first. When it was my turn, the lawyer slid a single item across the table. A worn, outdated coat with frayed edges. That was all. The room went silent before laughter broke the air. Nathan leaned back casually in his chair, smirking as he asked if I planned to trade it for a hot meal. Claire, always sharper with her words, whispered just loud enough for the others to hear, calling it a perfect fit for someone who had always lived like a stray. Their laughter stung, but what cut deepest was the cold little smile from my Uncle Richard. He didn't need to say anything. His look carried the same message it always had. I didn't belong. For a moment, humiliation burned so strongly that I considered tossing the coat into the nearest trash bin as soon as I left the office. But when I looked down at the fabric, I noticed the way it had been folded. Carefully, deliberately, as though my grandmother had left it for me with a purpose. Back home, I ran my fingers along the lining and felt something odd. A ridge, something hidden. My heart began to pound. I grabbed a pair of scissors, sliced through the stitches, and a sealed envelope slipped onto the floor. My hands shook so hard I almost couldn't open it. The words I read inside made my knees weak. When I walked out of that Manhattan office earlier that day, the grand marble floors, the golden glow from chandeliers, and the faint scent of expensive cologne all belonged to the world of my cousins. I had felt like a shadow at the edge of their wealth. But that envelope changed everything. My name is Daniel Grant, 32 years old, and money has never been my companion. I work in a small independent bookstore in Albany, surrounded by shelves of novels and poetry that gather more dust than sales. I make just enough to keep my modest apartment, enough to scrape by on groceries, but never enough to quiet the question that haunts me. What would life have been like if my grandmother's love had been paired with her fortune? Margaret Grant, my grandmother, was the heart of my childhood. She never measured worth by money. She valued honesty, kindness, and the way someone treated others when no one else was watching. After my mother, Eleanor, died when I was only 10, Margaret became my safe harbor. She brought me into her kitchen, showed me how to stir soup while telling stories about her childhood in the Great Depression, and reminded me over and over that strength wasn't about volume, but about endurance. Richard never saw me that way. He entered the family after my mother's passing, marrying my aunt, and from the very beginning he made it clear I was nothing but a burden, sharp in business, ruthless in judgment. He shaped Nathan and Claire into mirror images of himself. They grew up in penthouses, wrapped in privilege, while I learned how to stretch every dollar and survive on little. That day, as the lawyer's voice echoed off the office walls, the divide between us was wider than ever. The estate was split cleanly between Nathan and Claire, and I was left holding a coat, or so they thought. They looked at each other with the smug certainty of victors, as though the outcome had always been inevitable. My name appeared in the will only once, not tied to accounts, property, or securities, but to a single heirloom, a coat. It was spoken of like an afterthought, a token meant to appease pity rather than honor memory. When the lawyer set it down before me, carefully wrapped in white tissue paper, the sting had already begun. Nathan chuckled under his breath, shaking his head with mock disbelief. "All those years, and this is what you're left with," he said, his words dripping with scorn. Claire leaned closer, her voice pitched just loud enough for the others to hear. "I suppose charity cases don't need inheritances," she whispered. her smirk sharper than a blade. My Uncle Richard crossed his arms, silent but smug. He never needed words. His silence always carried the same message. I didn't belong. I wanted to respond, to tell them I had never needed their fortune, that my grandmother's love outweighed every dollar they were about to divide. But the words collapsed inside me. Heat crept up my neck, humiliation pressing so heavily on my chest it felt like it might crush me. So I stood, forced to thank you to the lawyer through a voice that trembled, and left with the coat clutched in my arms. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Cabs honked. Steam curled from subway grates and people hurried past in tailored coats and polished shoes, their lives stitched together by money I could never touch. I felt invisible, carrying what they had mocked as a worthless rag. The fabric was frayed at the sleeves, the lining thinned with age, and one pocket bore so many patches it looked pieced together from scraps. But in my hands it wasn't only fabric, it was memory. I remembered nights at my grandmother Margaret's kitchen table, her voice soft as she told me stories from her childhood, while placing that very coat across my shoulders to keep me warm. It still smelled faintly of cedar like her house always did. I kept asking myself why she would leave me nothing more than this. She had known my struggles. She had seen how hard I worked, how little I had, how Richard and his children dismissed me. Was this her way of saying love was enough? Or was it a quiet reminder that I would never be welcome among them? By the time I reached my apartment, the weight of it all hardened into anger. I dropped the coat on the couch and paced, Nathan's cruel laughter echoing in my mind. All those years, and this is what you get. I wanted to call someone, to vent, to let the fury pour out, but there was no one to call. My circle was small. The friends at the bookstore would never understand, and the rest of the family had drifted away long ago. The silence of my apartment pressed in heavier than the mockery I had left behind. Eventually I sat down, staring at the coat under the glow of the lamp. Every crease, every worn stitch seemed intentional. I imagined my grandmother's hands folding it, wrapping it in paper, leaving it for me with care. My chest tightened at the thought. Perhaps she had wanted me to remember warmth, not wealth. But the sting of that office, of their laughter, still throbbed too strongly. I grabbed the coat, ready to throw it away, when my fingers brushed over something hard hidden beneath the lining. A ridge, thin but firm, out of place in the worn fabric. My pulse quickened. For the first time all day, a spark of hope cut through the haze. I didn't tear it open then. I couldn't. Exhaustion and shame weighed too heavily. Instead, I lay on the couch with the coat beside me, my hand resting where the hidden line pressed against the fabric, and I stared at the ceiling. Sleep never came, only the restless rhythm of thought circling the same question. What had she left for me? Their laughter hung in the air like a bad smell, following me as if it had nowhere else to go. I pictured them celebrating somewhere high above the city, clinking glasses over the windfall that had been handed to Nathan and Claire, toasting to fortunes I would never touch. Meanwhile, I sat in a tiny apartment with peeling plaster and a cast-off lamp, the coat tucked under my arm like a visible mark that said, I didn't belong. Dawn turned my humiliation into something hotter and harder, anger. I shoved my own jacket on, grabbed the coat, and walked to the corner diner for something that passed for comfort. The bell over the door chimed when I stepped inside, and the same waitress, Mara, set a mug of coffee down without asking. She knew my order, knew what I could afford. She glanced at the bundle beside me and asked, New coat? Old, I said. My grandmother's. Mara offered me a gentle smile, the kind strangers give when they think they've said the right thing. Old ones hold the best stories, she said, then went back to her rounds. Her kindness landed awkwardly inside me, a small consolation that felt in that moment like salt on a wound. To Nathan and Claire, that coat had been a joke. To Richard, it was proof of a plan completed. Their triumph tasted like ash in my mouth. After breakfast, I walked with the coat folded against my chest, the autumn air sharp enough to sting my cheeks. Storefronts showed men in suits I could only admire from a distance, tables lit for dinners I would never be invited to, and cars with glossy finishes that belonged to another world. Each reflection in the glass made me look smaller, as if the city itself agreed with them. I found myself standing at the edge of the subway steps, staring at a trash can as if it might swallow the whole mess. The coat, the pain, the memory. Toss it and it's finished, I thought. Walk away and pretend the day never happened. But my fingers found the seam again. Beneath the tired lining, something solid pressed against my fingertips, a ridge that shouldn't have been there. It surprised me. I was certain the coat had been just clothing when Margaret wrapped it around my shoulders years ago. Whoever had stitched that ridge in had done it afterward. Why would she hide anything from me? Why would she risk embarrassment to leave me nothing but fabric? That question snagged and wouldn't let go. I stepped onto the subway and kept the coat in my lap as strangers jostled around me. For the first time since the will reading, a small pulse of possibility grew inside my chest. Maybe the coat was not an insult but an instruction. Maybe Margaret had left me a secret, something she wanted me to find away from prying eyes and calculated smiles. Doubt, though, was a quicker companion. What if the ridge was nothing but a sewing quirk? What if I pried it open and discovered only lint and old mending thread? The thought of surrendering the last fragile hope I had felt unbearable. I could already hear their voices. Nathan's short laugh, Claire's sharp barb, Richard's satisfied silence, telling me I had been right all along. Nothing worth keeping. By the time I reached my building, my head had become a battleground. I tossed the coat onto the sofa and paced until my shoes were scuffed and my hands were cramped. The city's noise filtered in through the windows, indifferent to my turmoil. The coat lay there, patient and ordinary, as if it had no idea of the storm it had left behind or the possibility it might still hold. Nathan's laugh, Claire's cutting whisper, Richard's satisfied silence. Their ridicule kept replaying in my head. I stopped pacing and looked at the coat resting on the sofa, its weight ordinary and enormous at once. If I left it alone, I would live with the question forever. If I opened it and found nothing, the truth would split me in two. Fear tugged me both ways until sleep took me and turned me back into a child. I dreamt of Margaret's kitchen, the warm glow over the table, the scent of simmering broth, her hands moving with patient certainty as she stirred. 10-year-old me sat on a chair too high, knees swinging, and she glanced up with those steady, soft eyes. "Daniel," she said, "don't let them tell you who you are. Find out yourself." I woke with the echo of her voice and tears drying on my cheeks. Morning felt like a dare. I set the coat on the table, cleared away yesterday's dishes, and took the scissors from the drawer. My hand shook as I eased the blade beneath the seam. Each snip released a tiny sigh of thread. When the final stitch gave, I slipped my fingers into the gap and felt it, a rigid edge, slim and deliberate. I pulled and revealed a small yellowed envelope, its flap sealed tight with time. My breath hitched. Everything, the shame in that lawyer's office, Nathan's snide laugh, Claire's whisper, Richard's cold look, seemed to condense into the paper sitting in front of me. Margaret's handwriting arced across the front, familiar as the smell of her kitchen towels, and seeing it made my throat ache. I held the envelope like it could break, tempted to tuck it away and let hope linger untested. But half life spent on could-have-beens was a heavier burden than truth. I thought of their faces, triumphant, contemptuous, sure, and something in me hardened. I would not carry their verdict without looking. At the sink, I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror until the hollow in my chest steadied. "You have nothing left to lose," I told the man who stared back. It was enough. Back at the table, a butter knife eased under the seal. The paper sighed as it opened, a faint cedar and ink smell lifting from the fold. Inside sat a single sheet, thin with age and written in the slow, deliberate hand I had read on countless recipe cards and scraps of advice stuck to the fridge. I paused, memory after memory crowding the moment. Fireflies in the garden, flour-dusted afternoons kneading bread, the hush of bedtime stories that felt like armor. Margaret had been my refuge, more parent than grandparent, more shelter than many homes could claim. My fingers unfolded the page and my eyes landed on her words. Her voice came back to me in memory, calm and certain. "Daniel, truth will never be your enemy. Only lies will." With that echo in my mind, I unfolded the letter. The first line stopped me cold. "My dearest Daniel, if this letter is in your hands, then you are the one I trusted most." My chest tightened. The words weren't rejection. They were faith. I forced myself to keep reading, each line carrying more weight than the last. Margaret wrote of the estate, of how Richard and his children had always worshipped appearances. She explained that leaving them the visible fortune was not a gift, but a test, a way to reveal what wealth did to people who had never earned it. She predicted greed would consume them, and she wanted me far away from that fire. Then came the revelation that made my pulse hammer louder than the traffic below my window. She had other holdings, accounts, investments, even properties, hidden beyond the reach of the family, assets tied to my name, waiting, with instructions written in her letter on how to claim them. She hadn't cast me aside. She had entrusted me with the part of her legacy she valued most. The letter slipped from my hands onto the table as tears blurred my vision. For years I had worn the role of the forgotten grandson, the one unworthy of standing beside the rest of the Grants. Yet here in her trembling script was proof that I was the one she believed in most. The coat lay open beside me, its lining torn, its fabric rough beneath my fingers. What I had thought was worthless had been her deliberate choice. She knew Richard wouldn't bother with it. She knew Nathan would laugh, Claire would sneer, and the rest of them would dismiss it as junk. But she knew I would hesitate, hold on, and look deeper. She knew me. I rose and paced the room, the letter clutched tightly in my fist. Questions came hard and fast. Why me? Why had she given me this burden? Didn't she know how small I often felt? How unsure I was of my own strength? Then I remembered her voice on quiet nights telling me I was stronger than I believed, that I would one day carry more than I thought possible. Still, fear pressed down on me. If the letter was true, my life had just shifted in a way I had never imagined. Wealth on that scale could change a person. Could it twist me the way it had twisted them? The thought chilled me. I sat back at the table and read the final lines, my hands trembling. "Daniel, money unmasks people. That is why I entrust it to you. You never saw me as a bank or a burden. You saw me as your grandmother. You have the heart to carry this. Promise me you will not let them break you. Promise me you will remember who you are." The words blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I pressed the letter to my chest, closed my eyes, and whispered into the silence, "I promise." For the first time in years, something stirred inside me that felt like hope. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into its envelope, and tucked it into the coat's inner pocket. No longer a relic of humiliation, the coat had become a key, a bridge between shame and redemption. Margaret's final gift. When I woke the next morning, the letter was still pressed against my chest. My eyes were heavy from the tears that had carried me into sleep. But when I woke, there was a steadiness in my body I hadn't felt in months. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and unfolded the letter again. Line by line, I read it slowly, as if I needed to carve every word into my memory. At the bottom were the instructions. A separate trust hidden from the estate, created in my name with the help of an attorney. Her handwriting was precise, and the name stood out: Samuel Wright. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone. Doubt gnawed at me. What if the number was dead? What if someone laughed at me for believing in a fantasy? I dialed anyway. A calm voice answered. Office of Samuel Wright. My throat closed for a moment. This is Daniel Grant, I managed to say. I believe you may have something left for me by Margaret Grant. There was silence on the other end, then the tone shifted. Mr. Grant, the voice said gently. I've been waiting for your call. Can you come in today? The office was in a modest brick building downtown, nothing like the marble tower where Richard and his children had celebrated their inheritance. Samuel Wright was older, with kind eyes that reminded me of the rare teachers who actually cared. He shook my hand warmly, then motioned for me to sit. Your grandmother was deliberate, he said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. She wanted to protect you. She wanted her true legacy to be carried, not displayed. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were property deeds, account statements, investment portfolios. The numbers blurred together. Apartments in Manhattan, buildings in Brooklyn, a farmhouse upstate. Accounts that had grown quietly for decades. The total dwarfed the $8.5 million my cousins had been fighting over. My chest tightened. This can't be real, I whispered. It's real, Samuel said firmly. She built this in silence. She told me you were the only one she trusted to see it as a responsibility, not a prize. She believed the others would waste what they were given. Yours she believed you would build. Tears burned my eyes. For years I had lived under the shadow of being the forgotten one, mocked, dismissed, pitied. And now, staring at these papers, I understood. My grandmother had never turned away from me. She had chosen me all along. I leaned back, unable to speak, the weight I'd carried since the will reading peeling away piece by piece. Richard's cold indifference, Nathan's cruel laughter, Claire's sneers, they lost all their grip on me in that instant. They had celebrated scraps while my grandmother had trusted me with her true legacy. When I stepped outside, the city looked the same, taxis blaring, crowds rushing, wind slicing between tall buildings, but I no longer walked with my head bent. For the first time in years, my chest felt light. Later that week, I saw them again. Nathan and Claire invited me to dinner, their message dripping with condescension. They chose a glittering high-rise restaurant where chandeliers sparkled and waiters balanced dishes like art pieces. I knew why they wanted me there, to gloat once more. I arrived wearing the same coat, stitched carefully where I had once torn it open, the envelope resting inside the pocket like a heartbeat. Nathan smirked as soon as he saw me. Still dragging that thing around? Maybe if you shine it enough, someone will think it's vintage. Claire laughed, her voice sharp as glass. Daniel, you could have joined us in Paris if you'd gotten something real from Grandma. Instead, you're stuck in Albany. With that rag. Their voices slid past me without leaving a mark. I smiled, calm and unshaken. You're right, I said evenly. All I have is this coat. But sometimes the things people overlook are worth more than they realize. They scoffed, rolling their eyes, already brushing me off. That was fine, let them. They didn't know what rested inside my pocket, and they never would. On the train ride home, I slipped the letter out and read it again, each word steadying me. You have the heart to carry this. My grandmother had given me far more than wealth. She had restored something I thought I had lost forever, my sense of worth. She had reminded me that the world doesn't define who you are. It is the people who love you, who truly see you, who shape your place. Back in my apartment, I hung the coat carefully in the closet. I ran my hand across the fabric one last time and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." That night I lay awake not with fear but with possibility. Her trust meant I had the chance to create a future unlike the cold arrogance of Richard or the greedy laughter of Nathan and Claire. I could build something better, something lasting, something she would be proud of. That day in the lawyer's office, when Samuel placed the torn coat in my hands while everyone else celebrated millions, I thought I had been humiliated. I thought I had lost everything. Now I understood I had been given everything that mattered. My grandmother had not abandoned me. She had chosen me. With that choice, she had given me the chance to rise above the people who wanted to keep me small. The days that followed felt unlike any I had known. I no longer woke dreading the sound of my alarm, dragging myself to another long shift shelving books for a paycheck that vanished before the month ended. Instead, I woke with her words echoing inside me. She had trusted me. She had seen me, not as the forgotten one, not as the burden Richard often labeled me, but as the only one strong enough to carry her true legacy. At first, I told no one. The responsibility was too heavy to speak aloud. The properties, the accounts, the money, it was overwhelming. But heavier still was the responsibility to honor her. I thought of her kitchen, of the lessons she had whispered between recipes and stories. Strength is not measured by what you have, but by how you treat others when you have it. I knew I couldn't let her down. Meanwhile, Richard, Nathan, and Claire flaunted their inheritance like trophies. Their faces flashed across social media, trips to Paris, rooftop parties, designer bags stacked high. To them, wealth was proof of superiority, a crown to parade before others. But beneath their polished photos, I could already see the cracks forming. Nathan's arrogance grew louder, careless. Claire's tone shifted, more desperate, as if she already feared the life slipping from her fingers. By the end of the year, whispers reached me. Their millions were shrinking fast. Investments crumbled. Parties bled them dry. Luxury was a ravenous beast, eating away at everything they owned. They still posed in their glittering apartments, but shadows of debt clung to their names. Then one evening, snow drifting soft and silent past my window, my phone rang. The name on the screen startled me, Claire. Her voice, usually sharp and polished, wavered. "Daniel," she said, her tone breaking. "Can we talk?" A pause. "Maybe over dinner." I could hear the strain she tried so carefully to hide. For years, Claire had sneered at me, her laughter sharp enough to cut. Nathan had joined her, echoing the same contempt. Yet now their voices reached me not in triumph but in need. Claire called first, her tone unsteady, the confidence drained away. Days later, Nathan sent a message, polite, even friendly, but lined with desperation he tried to disguise. I understood. They had begun to notice the truth. Somehow they sensed I was no longer living in struggle. We met again in the same glittering restaurant where they had once mocked me for wearing the coat. Nathan sat straighter than ever, his suit pressed and sharp, but his eyes flickered with unease. Claire smiled too sweetly, twisting her napkin until it nearly tore. Their questions circled the air like vultures, careful, indirect, probing without daring to beg outright. I let them talk. I drank my water slowly, answering little, calm in a way that unsettled them. And when the silence stretched long enough, I leaned forward. "You laughed at me when all I had was this coat," I said evenly. "You thought it was worthless. But this coat carried something no amount of money could buy. Her trust. I don't need to prove that to you, but I will never forget how quickly you dismissed me when you believed I had nothing." The words struck harder than I intended. Their arrogance wilted, collapsing into silence. For once there were no clever remarks, no smirks, just the heavy quiet of people who realized their grip had slipped. I rose from the table and left, not with anger, but with a clarity that settled deep in my chest. I no longer needed their approval. I no longer carried their scorn like a burden. My grandmother's trust had already lifted that weight the moment I opened her letter. In the months that followed, her legacy became more than numbers on a page. I restored the old farmhouse upstate, turning it into a place where children who felt overlooked, children like I once was, could find belonging. I funded scholarships for students who had the drive but not the means. I began to build something she would have recognized, something that reflected the heart she had always given me. The coat still hangs in my closet. I rarely wear it, but sometimes on quiet nights I take it out, trace the seam I once cut open, and hold it close. It reminds me of that day when shame nearly broke me, and of how love revealed itself in the smallest, most fragile place. Margaret Grant's greatest gift was not wealth hidden in an envelope. It was the reminder that I had never been forgotten, never been unworthy, never been powerless. Money may reveal who people are. Some squander it, some worship it, but a rare few learn to use it to build. She trusted me to be one of them. Looking back, I realize if I had thrown that coat away, I would never have known. I would never have heard her last words. I would never have learned that what seems worthless can hold the greatest treasure. So if you have ever felt dismissed or unseen, remember this. Value does not always shout from rooftops. Sometimes it waits quietly, hidden in the places others laugh at or ignore. My grandmother's faith in me was worth more than any fortune, and that is the gift I carry now.